Hi, everyone. Welcome back for another episode of What Grinds My Gears by Bad Teachers. Today's episode is brought to you by Mevru Mituin. It is a lovely restaurant located in Tutnes, Suriname. Address Commissaristraat 57. Phone number plus 597-877-6261. Mention that Bad Teachers sent you, and you get your first beer for 35% off. Without any further ado,
Estaba sentado un perro, se cayó el perro y a la mierda el perro, y se va la vida.
hi everyone. Welcome back to another episode of What Grinds My Gears by Bad Teachers with Mr.
Yo, it's me, Mr. HS, over in England. Yeah, how you doing, Howling Mad Steve?
Yeah, and Spyro. And today we have a special guest. Yeah,
Extra special guest.
Yeah, good friend of ours. His name is Dr. Glaukos, okay? And he's very interesting for us today because he is an individual that was, for many years, was in education. And over the past, he'll tell us though, over the past year and a half or so, has been gradually, I could say, left education and is now in the industry. So the opposite of, perhaps some of our other guests, such as last week, where we had Bob Brooks, and he was in the industry and came into education. Good old Bob Brooks. But anyway, Dr. Glaukos, how are you?
I'm doing well. Doing well, mate.
That's good.
How are you guys? Thanks for having me. I appreciate the invitation.
It's our pleasure, Glaukos. And just, I mean, you fit the profile quite nicely. A lot of our viewers, listeners, have been asking, why don't we see people on camera in this session as well? Because Glaukos, like many others, is an ugly mother. And it was really quite socially unacceptable and not very pleasing on the eye. The standards...
That makes three of us then, right?
Exactly, man. Glaukos, people did have the unfortunate... I think people have seen me online, and many wrote in to express their disgust. So yeah, we like to keep it real. So if you are ugly, you're more likely to get on this show. Just so you know.
All right. I wish you could have told me this before. Go ahead.
I concur. Yeah. So, Dr. Glaukos, we got a lot of questions for you. They range from all kinds of stuff, but as far as education goes, tell us, why the hell did you get out of education? Because you were a professor for many years in the U.S. Have you ever taught outside the U.S. or U.S.?
Well, I've done right. I've done projects outside of the U.S., but never taught at a university outside of the U.S.
So why'd you get out of education? Because I've known you for many years. You're a good friend. I consider you a good friend, and I know you. We know each other's struggles, I should say. Why'd you get out of education?
Well, not to burst your bubble, and then I know you invited me because to be like the opposite of the guest that you had last week, but technically I'm still in education. I was just to put this. I guess, I was forced to leave education away because I moved from the U.S. to Denmark. And as the both of you know, the educational system here in Europe is very different than that of the U.S. And I am in the process actually of having all of my diplomas recognized by the Ministry of Education here in Denmark. So eventually, I don't know that I would, would want to go back to a traditional academic career like the one I had in the U.S. I've been teaching in higher education since we graduated, Spyro and I in 2008. So I don't want to have that same traditional career, work full time as a professor, do research and all of that stuff. I definitely don't want to do that. But in a way, to make a long story short, I was forced to leave because I just, even if I wanted to continue in that traditional academic career here in Europe, I wasn't there. There would be like a transitional period where I would have to have my diplomas recognized here, and then I have to apply for jobs. So, um, in the meantime, I'm trying different things in the industry to see if it's something I would like to do. But I always want to have the option of falling back into teaching if I want to. And then I'm still teaching a couple of online classes for some universities in the U.S. So I don't think I'll completely give up on teaching just yet. Actually, I don't know exactly why. I just, that's pretty much all, other than just being a personal trainer and then doing some things here and there. My only job after I graduated was in academia. That's something that feels safe, and it's something, an industry that I know. And so I'm not quite ready to give that up completely. But
that's interesting.
You've been working in the industry though recently, right?
Yeah. So since I moved to Denmark, I had to wait a little bit to get a work permit. When that came in, I was able to get a job doing sales for a technology company in sports. But that was short-lived. I worked there for about 4 months, and with the coronavirus, they fired everybody who they hired. I was hired, I think, in December of 2019.
Oh wow!
And worked there until the end of March. Everybody they hired 4 guys, so they doubled their sales team in 2 months, from December to the end of January. And then after the coronavirus, sales dropped drastically in the company, and they fired basically half of their sales team, or basically everybody who they hired in the December of last year. And then I think they hired January of this year. But yeah, I just I don't know if it was one of the questions you were going to ask me, so I'll just wait until you ask. But I can go more into what I was doing there at the company. But that was the first job. It didn't work as well as I had hoped. But I was able to land another job that I will start in August, doing something completely different.
So in the US, you were working at the company. This is the company you're talking about.
No, this is in Denmark. No, it's
beg your pardon. Sorry.
It's a Danish company. Yeah, I was excited because it was, I wanted to stay in sports, and it was a tech company. They make these cameras using artificial intelligence. They're a very innovative company. They are technically not a startup company anymore. They're in the scaled up phase. And they're trying to expand their sales globally, and they hired me because I had knowledge of the U.S. market. So I was trying to sell those cameras mostly in the U.S. market, and it just unfortunately didn't work out. But
how did you like though going from education? Of course, is not your traditional 9-to-5 job. It's not you having lunch with it's just different, right? You could be teaching night classes, daytime, this, that.
Yeah.
How did you like transitioning to a more traditional work lifestyle?
I loved it. One thing, and then Stephen, I don't know if you're in that same boat, but it's both Spyro and I, we had talked about this over the years. You take your work home with you when you're teaching, and it just seems like it's 24/7, especially if you're teaching online, or if you're teaching for a non-traditional university, where you're expected to respond to students, weekends, holidays.
Sure.
So going from that into my job, my sales job wasn't really a 9-to-5 job, because I was dealing with I was based in Europe and dealing mostly with the U.S. market. So with the time change, I would start later in the day, but I would be working until 9, 10. Sometimes I would be making calls at 11 o'clock at night. But I just didn't take my work home with me, and that was just that was huge. I would just work, put in my hours. and then just go home and be done with it. And then I would go back the next day. So that was one thing that was just, it was huge. It was a huge relief. And the other two, at least, for me, I had one job to do. So I just have to make these calls and I have to make these sales. And of course, there's a learning curve in the beginning, but once I got the hang of it, I think eventually I would be bored just doing the same thing over and over again. But I was only there for a little bit over 3 months, and I was still excited. I was still, engaged with the, just talking on the phone with potential customers and trying to close these sales. And that was a relief, because with teaching it, I always had this feeling of you don't quite know what you're doing. And even though over the years I improved, but there's always, I don't know, if you're talking about research, there's always work to be done, and then with teaching, kind of the same way, you're always improving, which there are pros and cons when it comes to that. But for me, it was just, I was burned out after 12 years in academia. But
yeah, man, you're right about that. There's the need for continuous improvement, and I don't think that's a bad thing in teaching. New methodologies, new tech, new ideas, new ways. Right. But there's a constancy of, there's always a new battle on the face of that. To convince a learner that they need to be different or do things in a different way, to defend your academic judgment to students that might want to challenge that on a too regular basis, I would argue. Things like that. And so, yeah, and you're right. And, up until 5 years ago, there's places, certainly in England, or universities, I say, that have European reach, there was still a need to mark on paper. And so, you're talking about taking your work home. You take it home, and there's a big pile of effing scripts to mark, and they're there, and they're in your face all of the time, cluttering up your office. And so, yes, it is that kind of at home, take home, stay home. Oh, I've got a grading to do. Don't get me wrong. I think sometimes marking on paper is easier than using such systems as the Turnitin based systems that we've got now. They're kind of painful. But yeah, I hear you. It's nice to be able to switch off, which you can't do in teaching. And these kind of generally absurd metrics about, responding to emails within 48 hours. Well, not if you send it at 7 o'clock on a Friday. Screw you. Right. So you can try those attitudinal ideas. And I think in education, some of the wrong metrics are in place for such things. Anyway, yeah, I hear you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's it's just, it kind of illustrates what I was talking about. Yeah, but the thing about academia, one thing that you brought up too, Stephen, that I was the fact that it required continuous improvement, that was exciting to me, because it was never the same. Well, not that it was never the same thing, but there was always something on the horizon. But at the same time, it was overwhelming because it was too much. There's too much coming out, and I've always felt that I was behind and I wasn't doing enough. And I was like, the whole imposter syndrome where you don't feel like you're good enough. Whereas with like the sales job, even though I wasn't, I was let go, but not that I was the best performer, but I was like, out of the, I guess, 15 sales guys that they had, I was sort of in the middle, and I felt that I was just gaining ground and improving, and I was only there for a short period of time. But I felt I could handle it. It was just like, I knew what I had to do once I learned the system, and it was just a matter of getting better at that one thing. Whereas with especially I've taught at some non-traditional universities in the U.S., but I've had, I taught for state schools, as we call them in the U.S. Those are where you had to do, teaching service and research. And most of the time I was overwhelmed. I always felt that I was behind. I was never caught up. And, that feeling of being overwhelmed constantly, it's especially in my case, I've been burned out, and I used to have these conversations with Spyro, but I've been burned out for years. And so
we've been talking for years about how Glausio, and even me too, like how, in the States, just that burnout factor, how you're always sort of getting really close to it. Not you, but in general, like you're always sort of approaching it, and you're stepping back, and you're always sort of like playing with fire, basically with your sanity. But what you said, though, you knew what you had to do at this job you had now. And I think that's kind of like when you work in the industry, non-academic, that's the thing. You do know what you have to do. Do you think that, like in education, many times you're just, yeah, you have to go to class, you have to teach the class, but there's so many other components. Do you think that many times you just don't know what you're supposed to do and you're just sort of floating around a little bit?
Yeah, and that, right. I do know. Yes, I do think that. But there's also the element, and you and I, we went to the same school, and this has been my biggest thing over the years. I don't know much about Stephen in that case, but I shouldn't say most, I shouldn't generalize it, but a good number of people who go through their masters and doctoral degrees, whatever doctorate, unless you have which Spyro and I, we both have a doctorate in education, but we were never taught how to teach. We were never ever. So, and then we were taught to I believe in the education that we receive. We became subject matter experts in sport management, and then we had to do research, and we were sort of trained in that. But our jobs were, my first job, the research was a component, but it was a small component. It was mostly teaching, and I found myself like having to teach 6 courses my first semester out of my first job in academia, and it was like, how do I do this?
That is fascinating.
Yeah. So that, and I think, I've had conversations with other faculty too, and then again, I know there are some disciplines where and depending on which program you go to, learning techniques and pedagogy and how to teach, that's part of the training. But for the vast majority of PhD and even EDD programs, that's not part of it. So that to me, and of course you get better, you improve, but you have to do it on your own, and that's always been a struggle of mine.
That is interesting to hear, actually. And I think now there's, in some subject areas, again, I don't want to generalize about this, but in some subject areas, this push now because of the vast amount of content that there is online, to generalize, a learner can teach themselves. And so now in the classroom for some subjects, you don't need to be so much a teacher, but a facilitator of problem solving. And you kind of facilitate. So, the argument is, why should I teach theory X, Y, and Z when it's been done a million times and you can see it on YouTube? What I want you to do as a learner is to go and learn that theory from, half a dozen sources on the internet. And when you come to class, I'm not going to teach you that. I'm going to show you how to use it to solve a problem. And there's a shift in thinking. And of course, it's called flipped classroom. And it is one of the evolutionary trends, if you like, within the teaching circle. But of course, the big limiting factor on such a thing is whether or not the student will do the work that they're supposed to do before they come to class. And that's a big shift. So rather than them coming thinking, teach me, teach me, teach me, actually, they got to teach themselves. Do you see what I mean? So I don't know I don't know how prevalent flipped classroom perspective is in the US, but it's trendy over here. But actually, I think it's got more value than just superficially trendy. I think it's an essential activity if we want learners to solve problems. Or we just leave it to the machines, and the machines will solve the problems for us, and we all sit back and have plenty of leisure time, apparently.
Yeah, well, it will come, but I think we've got some time before that happens. But
yeah, we have. Yeah, sure.
And that's all I've done. In fact, that in all of the way I would label myself when I would write the course syllabus for any course that I taught. Well, if it was a traditional face-to-face course, the title, I would never put the title of professor, instructor. I got in trouble for doing this a couple of times because sometimes you had to use a template syllabi from the university. I would always change that instructor or professor title to course facilitator, because my job was always, the students, the information. We're not in the 17th, 18th century where books were expensive, paper was expensive, so professor would have all that knowledge, and the idea was just to, like, the industrial revolution model, where you just you have that somebody has the knowledge and it passes that knowledge on to students. That we're not in those days anymore. But I always felt that my job was to facilitate learning, and so I've always taught that way. Since I started teaching, it's always been, and using flipped classrooms and
great.
and all that. But just teaching students how to think and use information.
Right. You know what? That's great to hear. And I think, therefore, Glaukos, not knowing how to teach actually or not being taught how to teach was probably not a bad thing.
No, not at all.
If you naturally feel or fall into this tendency to help people think or to facilitate or see yourself as a facilitator, I think you're right. Instructors, I get instructional design and instructors, and step-by-step stuff has its value, has its place. Of course it does. I get that completely. But yeah, you're right. Actually, how to think through a problem, how to solve a problem, how to use resources effectively to solve problems is what is perhaps missing now as the fourth industrial revolution really bites and takes hold, and within a couple of years we'll be just at the bottom of the exponential rise. Now we need a different skill set, or society needs a different skill set, and it isn't getting it. I have to say, it isn't getting it from education in England. And if you look at what the kids, sort of 11 to 15, if you look at what they're taught in their science syllabus, well, they're not taught anything about climate change. So a lot of them don't do business studies. It's a very limited kind of syllabus that doesn't prepare. And again, it's all just taught. Since the days of Aristotle and the likes in the classroom, it's a one-way delivery. And it's still the same in many sectors.
You guys want to do a
come on, man.
So this is Gla. We want you in this segment also. This segment is called Fire de Putza, which means eat the dick now.
Brace yourself, Glaukos.
Yeah, and what you do in this segment? What you do in this segment is you get two bad scenarios, one of which you have to choose. Okay. So it's you choose one of the two. You have to choose one of the two. So here it is. Your first scenario, either.
So that's for me, or that's for me, or either one of us.
Yeah, we both got to answer, man.
Yeah, you both got to answer, and I do too as well.
All right.
So from this point forward, every time you go to a job interview or a date, moving forward, you say at the very beginning of the interview or date, "My mom says hi," or you wear a beeper that is noticeable to all. You remember the old-fashioned beepers?
Yes.
What was that, the 90s? You wear a beeper that is noticeable to all. So it's like on the outside of your pants, just the way it was back in the 90s. And it works, and you will never have a mobile phone ever again. If someone asks you why you don't have a mobile phone, you must reply in a calm and an aloof manner, "I'll get there, buddy. I'll get there."
That's a good one.
Oh no, that is a good one, man. I'll tell you what. Oh no, I've got to go with the mum thing, I think.
I'm gonna. That's my answer too. I can't think of a good reason other than to say I would.
I do it, man.
I don't. No, it's just I'm not really good at thinking on my feet, but I could. I was thinking maybe I can turn that into a joke somehow, which would be awkward and that probably wouldn't work.
No. It has to be serious in the sense that
it has to be serious.
You cannot switch it after into a joke. Oh, I'm just kidding. You can't do that. Like you have to say, "My mom says hi," and then
morning,
continue
everybody.
the interview.
My mom says hello. Yeah.
Good morning,
exactly.
My mom says hi.
Yeah.
I like it. Yeah. I like it because that's like you got people looking at each other around the room going, "That fucking guy serious or what?"
Yeah, I could, yeah. It's just like, is he, is being sorry? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
That's
there's enough of an element of we're not sure. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
Other than wearing a beeper on the outside of your pants. Yeah,
Yeah,
Like, you know.
that one I wouldn't do it. That one is just, it would be.
What would you do, Spear?
If I seriously said my mom says hi at the beginning of every interview, that would be really, really embarrassing because I don't think I would ever get that job.
You wouldn't get the job, or you wouldn't fuck the girl either way. If you had a beeper, and then it was like, what was that? So what's the follow up? Why don't you have a cell phone?
Why don't you have a cell phone?
Cell phone, okay.
Yeah, like a smartphone, and you would have to reply in a calm and an aloof manner. I'll get there, buddy. I'll get there.
What?
So does that mean that your date is a guy? I'll get there, buddy. I'll get there, buddy. Yeah.
He's got you. I knew your marriage was a sham, man.
I'll get there. But then because I know you, by saying I'll get there, buddy. You are being facetious and you're being sarcastic, so it's kind of a joke. So I just
it basically comes down to, can you go without a cell phone today? It's basic. That's the basic question. I think that for me.
For you, I don't.
I'm gonna.
That's good.
I'm gonna go without the cell phone. I'm gonna go. In other words, I'm gonna go with the beeper. I am.
Shit, man, really?
I can't be saying my mom says hi at job interviews and things like that.
I can't.
I'll starve.
I can't picture that one way or the other, but I can see you pulling that off, Spyro. I can picture you pulling off, like bringing a beeper into a meeting or a date and just saying, "I'll get there, buddy," or girl.
I tell you what. One thing we got to add, of course, this to Spyro is when the guest answers, carrying on, and when Glaukos comes back for a second, you got to make it so that actually then the guest has got to go and do it and provide evidence of him or her doing it. As an addition, going into meetings and saying these things or wearing these things. We got to get that, man. That's hilarious.
That would be hilarious.
So you want somebody to go to an interview and actually say my mom says hi?
Basically, I want you to choose two options. I've got to, when the guest chooses one, he or she has then got to go away and evidence that they did it for a week.
Yeah, I don't think we'll have too many guests then. I don't think so.
That's funny, man.
Glaukos, how did education in your role so far, how did it prepare you or hurt you going into the industry? So now you're going into your second non-education job.
The second job, it's I don't know, and so the second job that I'm going into, it's more of a hybrid. It's working for a publishing company, and it's the title of it's faculty liaison. So the idea is to use my expertise or my experience as a faculty member to try to, help the sales team close these sales, mostly with libraries. The company that I'm going to work for, they have these databases. They have databases for case studies and data and these other things. And it's trying to get libraries from different universities across Europe, or mostly Scandinavia, Holland, and Belgium, to buy these products from us. So I'm hoping the reason they hire me is to use my expertise, but so I can't really tell you. I'm actually excited to get started because I think it will be a good fit for my, my set of skills and experience. Sorry, Stephen, were you going to ask me something?
Yeah, I was going to say, so sorry to interrupt again. So these products that you're selling, are you selling, so if I want a case study, so for example, at one of the better universities in London that I work with, if I want to recommend a case study, normally they'd say to me, "Oh, well, if you get a Harvard case study or something like that." Well, Harvard case studies are okay for to a certain degree, but they're not the only product on the market. And so, I might come along and say, "Look, I want these 3 case studies." And so, they will buy them individually from X said company. Is so that's something you offer, or do you offer your library of services on a license fee? Can I pay a license fee every year and access a whole range of products that you offer, or both?
So my understanding is I would say both, but my understanding, at least the part of my role, is to deal directly with libraries. So they want the library at a university to license those databases, and then the whole university would have that as a resource. So that's my understanding.
Okay, I tell you what I want. I don't have my doctorate. I'm some way through it and bored with it. I'm going to ask you another question about that in a minute. But I tell you what I would like is the case study is okay. Case studies have a lot to teach us. I get that, and I think they're very, very valuable. But what I would like, and I haven't seen this anywhere, although I understand Harvard do it, is I want to be able to buy a position for a student or a group of students in a company, a real company, to solve a particular problem that they have at the time. That's what I want. I want to buy a live case study from you.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So I don't know what this company will we have to offer, because I haven't had access to their products yet. But there are simulators in sport management. I've been in touch. I've adopted one. It wasn't very good, using artificial intelligence from this guy, I think from the MIT. It's not exactly what you're describing, but
it's the next step towards.
Yeah, right. So it's problem solving. Yeah. So you would they would present you with a problem, you would solve it, you would answer something, then depending on what you answer, they would give you options.
Got it. I would love to come and work with you and your company on a project to develop such almost real, artificially real situations like that. I've got 3 or 4 ideas for that already. Yeah. One particularly in law, to enable facilitation of law. I mean, I know this is being looked at in some areas, but I think education could benefit from this considerably. Yeah, man, sign me up for a project. I've got a bunch of ideas.
Okay, cool. I'm interested in that too. So
cool.
I'll definitely hit you up. But let me, Spyro. Does that, like, the one other thing I was gonna say, talk related to what you asked me is, so and this is just my gut feeling, but I think at my previous job, again, I was told that I was let go, or half of the sales team was let go because of coronavirus and the drop in sales. I think they were hasty in making the decisions to hire a number of salespeople. I think they hired more than what they needed, and they just used this whole coronavirus as an excuse. But in my case in particular, I've always had the feeling that I was overqualified, and even on my job interview, I think then they were looking, and maybe it's just in Denmark here, and the way I wrote my CV, and I was trying to play down the fact that I have an advanced degree, because it was an entry-level sales job. And I was a little bit older than most of actually, probably 10 years older than the oldest guy on the team, on the sales team. So I don't know if that hurt me, but it was, but that was the only thing. I wouldn't even call that a challenge. But as far as the doing the job, yeah, the only thing that it was a different, you asked me this in your question, but in academia, even if you have to teach your classes, you have to do research, but you're in control of your time, and you have a lot of freedom. Whereas with this job, even though I told you it wasn't a 9-to-5 job, but you have to go into the office and make calls. So it was that there was some sort of structure, but that I didn't have. It was it was a different structure, and I had to adapt to that. But that wasn't the biggest thing. The biggest thing was hearing over and over again that you're overqualified for this, or
I've been saying that for years. If you're going to go on and earn your PhD, you better be sure that you like teaching, because it limits you, and it's almost like a stigma when you go for these job interviews. They look at you like, what is this guy, retarded? Why does he want to come to work for us? He's got a doctorate, and they don't know the whole burnout thing, this, that, the other, and it really limits you. It really narrows your options down. I mean, obviously, you're going into a position now that it's an exception because it's a published company, but there's only so many of those. But it
Right.
will limit you. And I tell that to people who ask me, should I go for my doctorate? And I tell them, hey man, you better like teaching or research, because
Right.
you're going to screw yourself when, like, I've done the same thing as you have, Glaukos, like where I've gone to job interviews and I've hidden my PhD, actually, my doctorate, from my CV. And I've just, up to my master's in hopes of getting that job. And it's the way it is, though.
That's interesting. I was going to ask you earlier. So, am I under the right impression that both of you decided to do your PhD because you wanted to enter education, or you were in education and you continue to see yourself in education, and therefore the PhD was necessary?
You want to go, Spyro? You want to go first?
For me, I didn't have the guidance when I started my doctorate. I didn't have the family or friend guidance, someone to tell me what I just said. And for me, it was it was the recession years of, like, what was it, 2003? No, before that, earlier. 2003, 2000.
There have been so many.
Yeah, where the jobs didn't really pay, so I figured, screw it. But I didn't know that I would have such a hard time getting a non-teaching job in the future.
Well, for me, it was, again, this whole theme of being a necessity. I was curious to say this all. I was in another PhD program by the time I transferred into the university where Spyro and I got our doctorates. I was in the US, they call it ABD, all but dissertation.
Okay.
And at that university, I was, so I grew up in a country, I grew up in Brazil, I was in the US on a student visa, and it was a way for me to stay in the US was continue. I was a professional student. I stayed in school between, university, graduate school, or getting my master's, my first PhD program. I was in school, in college, in higher education as a student for close to 10 years. So I didn't want to break any rules, because eventually I knew I kind of wanted to stay in the US, at least at that part of my life. So I didn't want to work illegally. I just didn't want to break any rules. So staying in education was my way. I kept getting scholarships to stay in education. So I just didn't really see another option. In hindsight, I wish I had more time, where I would probably take, and I would tell my students this all the time: don't ever get your master's degree right after you finish your bachelor, because you need some time to see, or if you go back to grad school, this has to be what you want to do, or go for a specialization, and it has to lead to something, more pay or a different career, because just staying in school straight from your bachelor's, and then Spyro didn't have that path. But that's what I did. I was in school from, like, when I first got into university in the US all the way until I got my doctorate. But so it wasn't really, it ended up, I think, being sort of the right choice for me, I think. But at the time, it was something, it just, like, one thing led to another. I didn't really have this conscious decision of, I want to do this. I was born to do this.
That's interesting, though. I don't think that's necessarily improved, Glaukos. I really don't. I think now what I note, just from general observation, is, over here it's just go through a process, and as soon as candidates have finished their undergrad, they're signed up for the postgrad masters with no work experience at all. So there's no experience of application of, or working in, or working for, or working for themselves within a business-related environment, or the practice of their specialism. It's all still just theory. And, they just go blah, 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 and turn through the motions. And so now you have a large proportion of the side. Of course, there's a big push in the UK for people to go to university because it's a good money spinner, as well as, of course, the purposeful argument about, education improve social mobility, although we can't necessarily claim that in the UK, but all the other positive outcomes that come from education. But you're right, it's going through the motions. There's no, there's no thinking about trying something else amongst some of the generation. Of course, everybody comes out, millions of students come out with, an average 2-1 and an average percentage of 64, because that's what it is now in the UK. And so where's your point of differentiation? So, Dr. Glaukos,
Yes, sir.
have you realized the value, the money, if we were to monetize your time, dedication, sweat, the sacrifice, the six divorces that you had, getting your PhD, have you realized the value of all of that? Now, what are you, 12 years on from completing? Have you realized the value of the loss in 12 years? Are we at a break-even stage on that PhD? And would you do it again?
That's a good question. Yeah, it's a good question. In terms of the financial, in terms of like purely, from a financial standpoint, I would say absolutely, because I don't want to put Spyro in a depressed mood right now, but I've always had scholarships. I never had to pay for my education.
Okay, right. Sorry. Yeah.
So I never ever. No, actually, I take that back. Like my first semester in grad school, before I earned because I was on a graduate assistantship, I paid my way through, but that was about it. Everything else since university, I had being a good Brazilian, I was on a football scholarship that's how I ended up in the U.S. It was on a football scholarship, and then I, got an academic scholarship. Then I went to grad school. But so financially, I would say absolutely. And actually, that adds another layer to one of the questions you guys asked me earlier. It was just, to me, it was easy. I was really good at being a student. I was a professional student, like I said, and I kept getting these scholarships. So, just one thing led to another. But
check you out.
But then in terms of the time, because I had a failed PhD, my first PhD, it was my first doctoral program. It was a PhD. I have an EDD. I have a doctorate in education, which here in Europe, it's, as far as I know, at least in Scandinavia, it's non-existent. I have to explain to people every time what an EDD is. If you get a doctorate, you're a PhD. But my first was a PhD, and then I just had a horrible time. So definitely, if I had to do it over again, I would skip. I would not do that. And I was doing at the time because I went to a university in Pennsylvania, and this was it was a Penn State University, and I don't mind telling the name, but it was a graduate program in the medical sciences, and the research was just
cool.
A lot of pressure, and I knew going into it that it wasn't something that I would want to be doing long term. But in my mind, it was just back then. It was, I'm gonna get out of here with a PhD from one of the best universities in that area in the world, and I would be sure to get a job. But that wasn't enough to carry me through all those years. So I just ended up like, I've had enough. So I quit.
Fair enough. What was I going to ask you? Well, no, come back to me. Sorry, carry on. I'll think of something else in a sec.
No, I think. Go ahead, Spyro. Yeah.
No, so that was a good question, because I always ask that too. Like, would I go through this again, knowing what I know now? And I think that at the end of the day, look, you are getting a really good. You're getting your summers off. You're getting your Christmas breaks off, and you're getting a lot of flexibility.
Well, yeah. Sorry to interrupt. You kind of do. But, I think it goes back to, and I'm sure this happened to you, Glaucio, Dr. Glaukos' earlier point about you take your work home with you. So even when you're on holiday, the submission for the candidate is so late just because they're so lazy or inappropriate, or the organization wants to show such good willing, that submission day is the 21st of December, and then Muggins here and the rest of us, we got 2 weeks to market if you're lucky. Yeah. And of course that crashes your Christmas holiday.
Right.
No, that's happened to me too. I've graded many times, not just once, on Christmas Day, many times for a couple universities.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the way it is. Now that I say it out loud, it's actually sad, but it is. It's quite sad. But Yeah,
You know,
you know what it is. You sort of balance out your week, though. So, in other words, this is the way I look at it. You'll have more free time on a Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday to do something like a podcast, let's say, as opposed to when you work in the industry, you don't have time to do much of these things on weekdays, but your weekends are free. So you get that more regimented structure in the industry, and in education. It's really fluid. It's all kind of up to you. It balances out a little bit more.
Yeah.
yeah,
I don't
I'd
know.
say.
It's just
Yeah.
Can I? The other question I was going to ask in relation to, I'll ask you both of you actually. How many peer-reviewed journal articles have you published since your PhD?
Off the top of my head, so I've had peer review. I probably had around 10, and I had a
Great.
couple of book chapters. One book chapter was actually I had 2 book chapters in one book, and they were, it's kind of depending on which university you're in. They were peer reviewed, but not as a scientific publication.
Okay.
It wasn't a research piece, but it wasn't. That was one of my weak areas, and I always thought of myself as a researcher first.
Yeah. Okay.
But it just, but you don't, and I always, the reason why I went into sport management and the reason why I wanted to study that, I really wanted to do research, and I thought that but in the US, unless you go to an R01 institution where, it's either publish or perish. If you work for a mid-level or non-traditional university, your job is mostly, they want you to do research. There are different requirements when it comes to research depending on the university that you're in. But the university that I taught, and as long as you publish one peer-reviewed article a year, 1 or 2 would be ideal. Anything more than that would be you would be a star. But you don't have enough time to do it with all your teaching and service.
Right, and that's interesting. And here's another statistic that I read in New Scientist. I know I got it from New Scientist, but forgive me exactly when, I can't be sure. But as I recall, in 2015, I think it was, there were 2.2 million scientific peer-reviewed journal articles published. And 50% of them were read by fewer than 3 people.
Yeah.
And so, we do all this research, blah, 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 but it's, I don't know, maybe it's not falling on the right ears or in the right way. And no one wants to read, and the trend is downwards. Moreover, perhaps we don't need 5,000 word written, published, peer-reviewed articles so much as we need a 12-minute video that actually covers the same research, because people are more likely to consume video than they are to sit down and read 5,000 words of a peer-reviewed published journal article. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. Yes.
It's very interesting, that, as a statistic. So I wonder if we know less or are learning less now than we did 100 years ago.
The problem with today is that a lot of universities, to feel more respected or so, will ask their professors to do more research. However, they will not lower their teaching load. So let's say that you're supposed to do research, and you got 4 or 5 classes. What kind of research are you going to do? I mean, at the end of the day, perhaps you got a family, perhaps you got a life. It's not too much to ask for. Perhaps you like sleep, perhaps you like to eat food. And I say that because I've been a part of those institutions where they expect research, but yet you're teaching 4 or 5 classes. It's not going to happen. However, I've been a part of another institution in the Caribbean and in Trinidad. Glau, you've been there you visited me. That was incredible, because that was a really old-fashioned university, in the sense that I only had 2 classes a semester. Each class had maybe 10 students, 12 students, something like this. I could have done, and I did do some research down there. I had the time. Because now here in the States, just a month ago, I did some research. I did a book chapter in Olympic finance. And because I'm overwhelmed with, teaching in general, I sit there and I write this stuff, and I'm thinking, God, this is bad. This is bad. No, this is bad in the sense that, like, I was really big into Olympics and finance. And Glau will tell you, like, let's say a decade ago or 15 years ago, but I've been out of touch with it for the past, 7, 8 years because I've been full on teaching. And I'm thinking, oh God, this is like, it'll pass the average, the average student won't know the difference, but, people who know will know that this is not that good. And, so, and then you get to your question, Steve, about the people who actually do the peer review. They're just as overwhelmed.
They are
overwhelmed.
Yeah.
I've been a part of let's say journals that, we were supposed to do reviews, and same thing. They're overwhelmed.
I'll tell you what, right? I'll give you, And here's an observation again from New Scientist. It's my big weekly magazine to read. Two guys from MIT produced an algorithm that they taught how to write a conference paper. So they got this algorithm to write from scratch a conference paper. They submitted it to the conference and it got reviewed and accepted.
Wow.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? And of course, then they went along and said, well, this is just a joke, really, because, we just wanted to demonstrate X, Y, and Z. Of course, they got hounded out of the place. But here you've got reviewers that may not be reviewing appropriately. And it was, I think the context of the paper was utterly and completely made up by the AI. So it might have brought some things together, but it perhaps wasn't possible. Don't quote me on the details, but it got through the check-in system. Maybe this is because the algorithm was so good, or maybe this is just because the content sounded so convincing, or maybe someone's not checking properly because they're just as overworked as other people in the sector. And it kind of makes a mockery of elements of it. I published 2 papers, one by myself and one as a collaboration. And I remember the reviewer coming back on the first paper talking about I did this with another good friend of ours in London, a Kiwi, half Kiwi, half English, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
JB.
Yeah, JB. And and we wrote that paper along with a couple of other colleagues, and the reviewer came back, obviously had read it. My God, he was asking some questions. I said to JB, I said, I don't even understand what he means. And there's this idea of this overly verbose language that's used. And I think there was Professor Richard Dawkins was on the radio of recent history talking about academic papers and had reviewed a paper from Craig Ventnor. Now, Craig Ventnor is the guy that's kind of or one of the things he did was creation of synthetic life using, synthetic molecules. One of the things he's done. And Richard Dawkins said, I've got my professorship. He said, I've written papers and stuff. He said, I can't understand even Craig Ventnor's paper in terms of the language and what it meant. And I thought, that's interesting. So the research sometimes becomes utterly and completely inaccessible to the masses, and maybe that's right, and is only accessible to the very few, and maybe that's wrong. Anyway,
no, I couldn't agree with you more. I couldn't agree with. We could do a whole other. I have so many thoughts on a lot of the things that we touched about, but I have really strong opinions about that, which I would agree with pretty much everything you said. But I can go on and on about that. But
that's good. Listen, listeners, this is the first time we've had a guest that wants to come back. I mean, you should see some of the previous comments from previous guests. Really fucking hate us. But anyway, there we go. So you heard it here first. Dr. Glaukos wants to come back. We'll have you back for another discussion. But sorry, carry on.
No, it's just archaic. It's like
Isn't
whole
it?
system that it's just, and it's an industry. Again, I won't name any names, but Spyro, when we met, Stephen, when I went to London, I was presenting at a conference, and there are conferences, and I don't know which, that paper that you read at the New Scientist, I don't know which conference it was. There are some conferences where it's hard to get in, the acceptance rate low when they do their due diligence and reviewing papers.
Sure.
But there are other conferences that it's just, anything that gets submitted gets accepted, because it's that industry of education, especially higher education, where I got my name on something. And in fact, both Spyro and I won. We were the paper in our, well, I won't go into the details, but we were voted the best paper at the conference. And
you didn't tell me that. Are you serious?
Oh yeah.
Or
maybe actually
Spyro,
no. Let's get back to later, because I presented at that conference 3 times. So maybe that one year it was not, but I'm pretty sure it was.
Look, Spyro, the reason he didn't tell you, there were only 2 submissions and mine was the other one. So, I mean, come on.
Yeah. Actually, it's it was worse than that. There was 1 submission and it was ours. I know that for a fact. So, and I'm sure it's, they're in other disciplines, but it is an industry, and there are people who are just out there to make money off of conferences and publications and journals, and the quality of these journals is like when you throw out the term, again, I can go on and on, but when you throw the term peer reviewed, there are peer-reviewed articles and there are peer-reviewed articles. It just depends. Some journals have 2-3 reviewers plus the editor. Others, I think, at least in businesses, it's 2 or 3 reviewers and then plus the editor. But and most of those reviewers are not paid, and it's part of what we call professional service. And then Spyro made the point: all of us are busy. Who's got the time? And usually have somebody who just skims through the paper and then writes some comments there. Others, like the guy who wrote you back, and they think it's just like, this is their life is just it depends on this, and they just want to. They care too much about it, so it's the whole system is flawed, and it's.
Well, the other thing with the conferences is that they've become, and I've noticed this over the past several years. I mean, not that I'm not that old. I've noticed over the past decade they've become money-making machines in the sense that
it's an industry.
Because it's event management. It's just a different niche of event management.
Yeah,
I know people around the world who run these conferences, and they get various. I mean, some of it's just straight up profit, and then some of it's just kickbacks. If we could use that word, kickback. I'm from New Jersey, so they get kickbacks from the hotel that the people are staying at, from the restaurants that the people are going to, from the side trips, because there's always like some kind of side trip to whatever historical or whatever the
it's an industry. Yeah, absolutely.
And there's money coming back to the organizer of the conference.
So now we question the motives.
So it's in their interest to accept as many papers as possible. I mean, they're not going to accept obviously gibberish, but here you have a guy from England, here you have a guy from the US. Yeah, they want to bring that paper there because a lot of the other papers perhaps are from lesser desired countries as far as academia goes. So it's like, bring them on board. And plus, these conference fees just to go is $300, $350, depends on what the conference is. They're not going to decline you that easily to go to these conferences.
Yeah, it's state of the world, isn't it? State of the world. Maybe the machines will be better than us. And apparently, in some industries, they're currently a lot better than us. I'm talking about AI-driven stuff now. You look at the medical sector and the Watson IBM supercomputer is 88, 92% accurate now at diagnosing your health condition based on your symptoms, whereas your GP is around 40% accurate. So, I mean, that's a huge difference in accuracy. But here's the thing: what can Watson do that the rest of us can't? And of course, there are many people around will sit and criticize your lack of knowledge and your lack of judgment and all the rest of it. It's like, screw you, right? Who's got time to read 20 academic papers in a week? Actually, what Watson can do is 20 academic papers in a microsecond. And the other beauty with Watson, they found when they trialed this, was it can make connections between papers across the industry that a human being probably wouldn't be able to do. And it can look for those links between papers and thus potential links between biological issues that people can't. And I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
And so, isn't it? Right. And Watson is pretty cool. And I think JPL in the States have got Pleiades, their supercomputer, and this idea of supercomputers with artificially intelligent, algorithmic based learning. This is I hate the word, a game changer, and has been for a long time. Although, of course, it's not widely available to all of us, but it is there and it is in place. And I remember back in the days of having a Commodore VIC-20 with those basic programs that, would ask you questions and you would enter something. And of course it was a program. So it's, if that, do that. But now 40 years on, we've got some very cool ideas around and some great ways to learn much more or do much more with the data that is there. So I love the fact that the research is out there. The question is, how do we mobilize it for the masses in order that I can access it easily and be able to understand it and summarize it and understand the links between papers such that I might be able to use it myself, or my business might, or the industry might. You see what I mean? So
right, absolutely.
It's a really underutilized resource. And the question is, can I read one academic paper a week? Yeah, sure. And on lockdown, could I have read 2 every day? Sure. Did I? No. I do want things simplified, and as much as I hate oversimplification, I don't mind simplification when it comes to a 5,000 word paper with language I might not understand. I've got to stop and look up, 20 words every half an hour. You know what I mean?
I do. Absolutely.
Anyway.
All right, good. We have another segment too. If you want to join us, it's called Relationship Advice. So we have somewhere around 52 million subscribers, 100 million viewers. Is that right, Humps?
It's down 8 million. It's down 8 million because Stephen said it was 58 in the beginning of this, so we dropped from 58 to 52. But okay.
Yeah,
it's somewhere. It's like the stock market.
It's like
the stock market.
Yeah, your investment
plus or minus 8 million. Who fucking who cares?
Exactly, man.
It's 8 million.
Look, come on, man. Investments go up and down, and ours are clearly on the way down at the moment. So there we go. Come on, then, man.
So this one is this segment's called Relationship Advice, and we get emails or comments from people, and they ask us for advice. So this here is an Aussie, actually, a girl from Australia. She says, "Hi guys, I do great adventures around the world, like climbing and hiking. I am traveling back to Nepal in a month or two to meet someone I've been talking to for about 15 months now. I went to Nepal with a few friends late last year to trek, and I kept in contact with the trekking agency people and my guide. This guy, who's a friend of one of the trekking agency people, added me on Facebook. We started talking. He's my age, 23. So it was really easy to get along with him, and he started studying English again recently. So again, he's from Nepal. He tells me about his family and friends, his work and his future goals back in Nepal, and I've decided I wanted to meet him in person. He introduced me to his brother and sister, who I also met on Facebook, who told me he talks a lot about me. Nowadays, it seems we are already in a relationship naturally, and we both say it involves trust because we are so far away from each other. I'm really keen to go back and do more traveling, but because I'm meeting up with him this time in Nepal, he wanted to show me other places in Nepal. I'm half excited and half nervous because it's the first time. It will be the first time in his family. It will be the first time in his family, and it seems strange. So, all right. So basically, she's asking
for a freaking question, man.
Yeah. So she's asking how to go about this because she's going up there to Nepal. She's going to meet the guy face to face and his family. Glau, you first.
Don't go, girl. Don't go. He just wants your money. Don't go.
Okay.
I have no idea. I don't know. It would be. This is so far fetched for me. I would never. I can't even picture myself in a virtual relationship. I know people have done well, maybe not. He said she's been in a kind of like corresponding with this guy for what, 15 months?
Yeah, and they're like in a face, online relationship.
I know, yeah. I honestly, I know it sounds cliche, but if she feels like that's the right thing to do, just give it a try and see.
Well, I think that's interesting. I think she got to be careful. This girl clearly sounds like she eats cow, and I mean, the dominant religion in Nepal, of course, is Hinduism. So this may not be a good idea.
So it may not be a good idea, huh? All right.
Yeah, it's just like what you said. She's adventurous, so she's been on. If she's that type of person, I would be reluctant because it's a country I don't know anything about. I don't know about the culture, even if I've been in touch with members of his family, and just I don't know. I personally, I would. It wouldn't be. It wouldn't. It's not something I would ever do. But if in her situation, I guess. Like the opposite, like would you always? She'd probably be wondering if she said no. What would have happened? And I don't know her situation. I don't know if she's. I have no idea. I guess the one thing for me is I would always be wondering. If I didn't, let's say 20 years from now, I don't have a successful relationship, and I thought maybe that one could have worked and I didn't try it. I would at least want to try to see if it was something that could potentially work. Maybe not in his. If we could meet at like a neutral place, but then how are you gonna do that? You're gonna meet like I don't know. If he's from Nepal, let's just go meet where and like I don't know, India somewhere. I don't know, but maybe that could be a way around it.
Yeah. I think she's got a relationship with a cow. I think there's problems here for this relationship. I mean, Hindus have got enough trouble with their relationship.
Yeah, but you would think over those 15 months, maybe that came up in those 15 months, and maybe that was something that they discussed.
You know what?
Maybe.
Or maybe he just wants to get her because she eats cows. Yeah, he's just been biding his time, man.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I don't know, man. I tell you what.
I don't know.
Her description was so long, I got bored before we even got to the question, man.
Yeah. She wanted to give us all the details, so I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool,
I would say for her, I'll just give my 2 cents. I would say for her, going up there, make sure you wear always clean underwear.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Always.
Very, very important for all girls. Make sure you wear clean underwear. And, when it comes time to being romantic, don't have protected sex.
Sure. Very good advice, especially for a girl.
Bareback,
Great
right?
advice.
That's what you're saying, right? Okay, yeah, fair enough, yeah. Ridiculous relationship advice. Ridiculous question. Please don't write to us again.
All right. So
we just lost another 1 million viewers.
Well, we just lost another 1 million. But who's a million between friends? Okay, man.
So yeah, if you do have any questions, seeking some of our wonderful relationship advice, please do email us. That is vaginaboobadteacher@gmail.com. Vaginaboobadteacher@gmail.com. Vagina is spelled like vagina. Boob is spelled like boob. Bad teacher, you know the rest. And also, you can leave a comment underneath the video.
Yeah, thank you to the 100 million people that left comments last week.
100 million people.
But in particular,
we just broke the internet. We
did, yeah. But in particular, a person called Stevens, who said that they simply loved it. We love you, Stevens. We love you, Stevens. And that was on with Bob, what's his name? So Bob Brooks last week, Bob Brooks. So you're up against Bob Brooks this week, Mr. Glaukos. So
I just got I'm on the page right now. I got 120 million comments. As live actually, because we're
beautiful, absolutely. You heard it here first, people. Let's give a round of applause to this week's guest, Mr. Glaukos.
Hey man, we want to thank you for joining us. this week. We'll definitely have you on again in the future because I could see we touched some nerves there, especially with the research there and the conferences. So yeah, I know that's a whole other bag of beans, but that's for the future. But thank you.
Yeah, well, Mr. Dr. Glaukos, you can come back and we'll talk much more about the state of research today.
We'll do anytime.
Okay, man.
Be happy to. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. See you soon, man.
Oh,
Talk to
wait.
you guys.
One last question, Glau, because you're in Denmark.
Yes, sir.
What time is it there now? And is it still light out?
No, not anymore. It's 11:19 right now. 11:19
And
p.m.
it's completely dark?
It's completely dark.
Perfect.
Wait another 4 hours and it'll be light again.
That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you very much.
Okay.
You're welcome. All right.
See
cheers.
you, man.
See you. Thanks.
Bye.
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 Hey!